Hello and welcome to everyone to another session in Data Hour series. We are thrilled to be here with you this evening for a session full of action-packed learning. Myself, Abhis JJ, I am on behalf of Analytics Vidhya. For those who have joined us for the first time, I will give a brief introduction to the Data Hour sessions. Data Hour series is a webinar conducted by Analytics Vidhya and led by top industry experts. It's a fun way to understand the concepts of data science from leaders in data tech domain. And as name suggests, it's 1 hour dedicated to data. We are hopeful that these sessions are going to be a great resource of enrichment and value adding community members. Now, on to our session today, which is an introduction to measuring marketing channel effectiveness. In this data hour, we have Anurag Nair, who is analytics manager at Mitra, is going to explain the methods of lag, ad stock, and rich transformation for marketing channel data, which is used in Facebook, TV, Instagram, radio, etc. And will then discuss the difference between the Bayesian versus frequentist approach to estimation or forecasting. I hope you are excited to attend this data hour with us. So now on to our speaker in the session of data hour, we have Anurag Nair with us. So when I'm talking about Anurag, he has 7+ years of experience in data and analytics domain. He's currently working as analytics manager at Mitra. He's responsible for facilitating data-driven executive decision across various vertical responsible for facilitating data-driven executive decision across various verticals. Previously, he has worked with Genpact and Mu Sigma as data scientist. Now it's time to hand over to the speaker, Anurag Nair. The virtual stage is all of yours.
Hi, Abhijit. Thanks for having me here. Am I audible?
Yes, Anurag. Yes.
Great. So yeah, I think I'll quickly start. Thank you everyone for joining. I'm Anurag. As Abhijit mentioned, I currently lead the revenue analytics function at Mitra. Today, I think I put together some material to discuss how one can go about measuring the marketing channel effectiveness. So I'll just quickly share my screen. Just give me a second. Okay, is the screen visible?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, okay. So how do I switch off the? How do I switch off annotations? Okay, that's fine. Great. So should I move on?
Sure.
Yeah. Great. Good. Thanks everyone for joining. So I'll just quickly start with discussing what kind of marketing channels exist today. So some of the different types of marketing channels are, let's say, digital channels, TV or radio, newspaper and print, and out of home. So digital ads would comprise, say, social ads that show up on your social media feed, that show up on Messenger, for example, Facebook Messenger, or various different real estate of the app while using a particular app. So, for example, ads that you see on Instagram here that directly lead you to a landing page of the website that's advertising, or you see an ad here on a website. So often free websites that share information have ads on them this way. And so, yeah, so there are various different kinds of digital ads. A lot of us might be familiar with. There are also TV and radio ads. Again, fairly obvious. You would see, let's say, Myntra ads on TV or Flipkart ads on TV. You can also have ads that are, for example, the Tatas. When you start Tata Sky, you see an ad right at the beginning, irrespective of which channel you go to, even before you go to a channel, right? So often it's called programmatic TV, where the advertising is already programmed, and the vendor providing the advertising is already fixed. So you would see the same ad over and over again. So there are various different kinds of TV ads also. Similarly, radio ads. If you listen to music on the radio, you would often hear them talking about ads in between. So yes, that's one. In newspapers, this is, yeah, these used to be more common earlier, not as common these days, but yeah, so you used to have full page ads for Flipkart, Amazon, Snapdeal, right? So this was back in the day when Flipkart and Snapdeal were against each other and releasing full page ads. So advertising clearly works here. Similarly, you would have print ads, or what we call print ads, which is basically ads that show up in magazines, right? So when you're reading a magazine, you give it a lot of time and thought, and so when there's a full page ad, you bother to go through it, right? So those are certain ads, and then there's out of home, or what we call out of home ads, which is basically, let's say, billboards, right, similar to this one, or even boards at bus stands, right? Even you might have even seen buses with branding of certain companies. So every advertising, every outside comes under out of home advertising, essentially. So these digital, TV, radio, newspaper, and print, and out of home are pretty much the major channels of advertising used these days. So now, okay, so I'll quickly start with what the data would look like. So we are discussing how to measure marketing success. One basic question is, okay, for the amount that I have spent on marketing, what was the ROI that I saw in sales, right? And so the data that you would have while measuring would be something like this. This is just an example, but essentially, let's say you have a date level data where you have the number of impressions on each channel, right? So when we're talking about, let's say, Facebook ads or Instagram ads or Pinterest, various other Snapchat, various other digital platforms, when you see ads there, ads are usually put there through so those are basically called impressions, and I've mentioned what a GRP and an impression here is. But whenever you see an ad digitally and it shows up either on your website or an app, it's counted as an impression, right? And so the number you see here is the number of impressions that went out for 1st January 22 on Facebook for a particular company. So let's say this is like a let's say this company sells some consumer electronics product, let's say earpods or AirPods, right? So they had a 150,000 impressions on Facebook only, right, on 1st January. And so that continues for the rest of the days. So it varies based on seasonality, based on various different factors. Similarly for Instagram, right? So for digital channels, you would see impressions here, right? Uh, Now, when you go to TV, right? So the difference in TV is the usually TV marketing is measured through GRPs or TRPs. GRP stands for gross rating points. Uh, if you see here, what GRP means is, let's say you want an ad to be seen by, let's say, women between the ages of 20 and 50, and you knew that, let's say, 40% of the TV viewers in that demographic watched, let's say, Sony primetime programming every Saturday night, right? Since you're advertising a new product, you decide to run 3 commercials between, let's say, 8 to 10 p.m. And so the GRP here would be 120, which is basically the percentage of the target audience multiplied by the number of times the ad aired or number of commercials you ran, right? So if you run 3 commercials between 8 to 10 p.m. and 40% of that demographic watched it, the GRP would be 120, right? Generally, TV ads are measured through GRPs and TRPs. A lot of people would have heard of. So usually, when we are doing this kind of an analysis, this is what the data looks like. And for that particular day, you would also have the sales, right? And so the idea here is, first thing we need to do is standardize them. So since TV measurement is in GRPs and digital ads are in impressions, there is a disconnect in the measurements, right? And so usually what the first thing we do is try to normalize the two metrics and uh, try to either convert all of them into impressions or GRPs. Usually impressions are a far better measurement of how many views essentially the ad. There are various but eventually what you would have is a data set with only impressions. And so these 120 GRPs would be equivalent to, let's say, 1 lakh impressions. So that's what would come here. And so we would standardize the metric for all variables. right? So this is just an example, but you would have various other, let's say 20, 25 channels across which you are marketing, right? And so first thing is, what if I just look at how many impressions I sent out and the sales directly, right? That should ideally tell me, uh, it's basically a numerical correlation, right? It should tell me if I increase my ads, will my sales increase, right? But with marketing, the difference here is that when you market on a particular day, the impact of the marketing is spread across days, often lasting for weeks, right? And so depending on the channel where you're running the ad and the nature of the ad that you're running. So let's say you watch a Facebook ad for, and I get this example later, but let's say you watch a Facebook ad for Lay's chips, right? The idea is that you would make the purchase usually within the day or the next day, right? After which I just assume that you've forgotten about the ad. Whereas if you've seen an IPL ad on TV, right, you are likely to remember it 2, 3 weeks from now, right? And so maybe more. And so there are various different aspects to marketing where the impact of your spend or your impressions are spread out across days in various proportions, depending on the nature of the channel that you're advertising, right? And so how do we incorporate these effects into our data, right? So now that we know that, okay, out of this 150,000 impressions, not all of them were seen with, or not all of them would react within this week, or essentially not all of them would be effective within this week or day, right? So how do I divide this across the next few days or weeks? And how many impressions from before had an impact on this day? So the sales of 3025 are not just because of the impressions here, but because of the impressions the day before and the day before and so on, right? So there's a recursive effect of marketing. So in order to capture that, there are various transformations that we use. So there are three that I talk about today. The first one is very simple. It's first we lag the impressions, right? So for each variable, right? So I've taken Facebook here. You would basically just take a lag of the impression variable against the sales data. So instead of taking 150,000 impressions for this day, I would push it to this day, right? But this also had an impact on this day. So I'll come to how we'll incorporate that. But essentially, lag function as is commonly used will be used here to lag the impressions, right? And so yeah, how I've explained here is basically it consists of the delaying effect of impressions by a fixed time period based on the channel. So uh, now the amount of lag varies based on the nature of the channel. So if you are, and this is a good example, let's say if you've seen a desktop ad, you visited a website and you saw a Lay's chips ad, right? It's usually meant to be, uh, the expectation is you would buy it within the day. You would probably go out and buy it from a shop, or you would probably order it online through Swiggy or Dunzo or something. But you would react on it within a day, maybe two, not more than that. You'd probably forget about that desktop ad after a day, right? So the impact that that ad could have is very limited. And so if you've seen this ad and you've bought Lay's chips after a week, it's very less likely it's because of this ad. It's probably because of some later ad that you saw, right? Closer to your date of purchase. Similarly, if you look at a TV ad for Nike shoes, right? So for what I've said here is a desktop ad for Lay's chips, let's say, is meant for people to purchase it within a day. And so the lag cannot usually be greater than 1 to 2 days, right? But a TV ad for, let's say, Nike Jordans, right? Now that is usually run for brand recognition and awareness. So that when you make your next shoe purchase, you remember Nike. Now your next shoe purchase may not be for the next week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, right? So the lag of that variable would be much higher. So you would take like a 2 week lag or a 3 week lag, right? Compared to a 1 day lag, right? Because the ad is likely to last much longer, and the purpose of the ad is recognition and awareness, right? So lag is the first transformation that we do. Now, keep in mind, there are multiple transformations happening on the data. So when I do a lag, that doesn't mean I am not counting the impressions from this week or from this day within the same day, right? I'm also doing that, but I'm also incorporating other transformations. So apart from lag, what we also look at is, let's say, decay or ad stock. So um, I I'm not interrupting, I guess, for a Q&A, but if you have any questions, please leave it in the Q&A. Can take it up, right? So I think, yeah, this is on lag. So the other transformation that we generally use is decay or ad stock, right? So when now the concept of lag is clear. Okay, I've seen an ad, I'm going to make a purchase within n number of days based on where I've seen the ad, right? So similarly, an ad has memory also, right? So the lag was more around the reaction time of the customer, but decay is about the memory of the ad, right? For example, a Lay's ad, again, that you've seen on a website, you won't remember uh, very long, right? We often spend our time online and across websites and apps, and so the memory retention of the ad is varies across each platform, but by and large, digital ads have much lesser memory. You don't remember it for that long. But that's not the case with, let's say, a TV ad or a front page newspaper ad. You remember it much longer. So the ad stock or decay here, ad stock is just a general function used to measure the decay, but the transformation in question is decay, essentially, of the memory of the ad. So the decay incorporates the prolonged impact of the ad on the memory of the customer. So there are multiple ways of measuring this decay, and ad stock being the most common one. So if you see here, decay, another way of understanding it is if you've read about chemical isotopes in school, let's say, right? So we used to learn about half-life of certain chemical isotopes, right? Within the half-life of a certain isotopes, let's say 2 weeks, which means half of that radioactive material is lost within 2 weeks, right? And so similarly here, decay represents the half-life of an ad, meaning the velocity of an ad to go to half of its original impact, right? So if an ad has a 5-day half-life, it takes 5 days for half of the ad awareness to get lost. That's the general assumption here. Again, this changes day by day. This is like a case by case. I've just taken an example, but yeah, if you had a channel where you were marketing, which had a 5-day half-life, it means that whatever brand awareness you were hoping to create, half of that would be gone within the next 5 days for those ads, right? So if you look at these ads here, 1.5 lakh impressions, right? If the half-life of Facebook were to be 7 days, then by here, right, by the seventh day, the brand awareness of this has reduced by half. Okay, so the reaction time has gone away, but the brand awareness has reduced by half. Right? So that's an example. So if you so the basic formula, again, this is for understanding carryover effect in advertising, which is also another way of expressing decay. So if you see here, basically we take the advertising weight or the GRPs, and this is generally done for TV ads, but there are various ways of transforming it even for digital. So if you look at GRPs at time t, that would be capital T here, right? And some lambda, which is the rate of decay. So decay could happen at multiple rates. I gave an example of a 5-day half-life, right? So, but that decay could be, it could vary based on what kind of ad it is, right? So, if you have a very unique ad, you are likely on TV, you are more likely to remember it for much longer. Whereas, let's say, an ad you see today on Instagram, you might forget by day after tomorrow, right? So the if the total advertising GRPs plus the decay parameter, that into basically what your advertising is for the previous day. So if you see here AT and AT minus 1, like this is a recursive process. So your current advertising decay is a function of yesterday's decay and the day before and so on, right? Which is captured here. So it's a function of uh, today's advertising. So let's say today I ran 1.5 lakh impressions, but I had run 1 lakh impressions yesterday. So there's going to be some memory. Let's say you forget half the ad by tomorrow. So half of the previous ad's awareness comes into today, right? And so that parameter would be lambda that calculates whether it's half or whether it's 1/4 or so on. And AT minus 1, which would be the previous advertising rate, right? Or previous advertising GRPs. So that's generally the carryover effect that we calculate in half-life. So in general, half-life for TV is, I mean, these are very generic metrics and they vary based on the industry, right? Or the business you're operating in. But in general, the half-life would be of a TV would be 2 to 4. TV ad would be 2 to 4 weeks. For print, which is primarily magazines, they would be 3 to 6 weeks. Online ads that you see, again, online ads, it varies based on where you see the ad. If you've seen a video ad online, let's say in between a game, it might have a let's say um, 2 week decay, right? Or 2 week. It takes 2 weeks to forget half of the ad, right? But if you've seen an ad while scrolling through, let's say Pinterest, right? It might be much lesser. You might remember half the ad only in 3 days, right? Or you'll basically forget the ad within the week. So for online, it depends on what kind of channel you do it on. Most of online ads are usually in feeds and on websites, and so that's why I've stuck to 1 to 2 weeks. They don't last very long. You don't remember them for very long. Radio, on the other hand, has slightly similar but slightly longer memory because you are clearly listening to the ad, and there are various things. There's less distraction, so you're more likely to remember it, right? And so it's slightly longer than online, which is purely visual. And newspapers is 2 to 4 weeks, which is the people remember it a lot more, which is why you see long first page ads on the newspaper. People tend to generally remember those for a while, right? So yeah, so those are general half-lives that you would see for an ad. So if you're marketing, this is what you would have in mind as to how long is the customer going to remember my ad, right? So yeah, so the chart here is just an example of how your ad stock will look like. So let's say you take again this example. Let's say you have a bunch of these data points, right? So what the chart shows is basically if the ad stock were, let's say, 10, right, and ad stock were 90, I am trying to understand, like, basically if you forget 10% of the ad, let's say in a week, and versus 90% of the ad, how long is the memory going to last? So the graphs would clearly show that, let's say, it lasts, the blue line basically lasts much longer because 10 decay, basically it's less decay, right? So if the parameter is lower, it means that you are expecting less decay of the ad, so it's going to last much longer and going to decay slower, right? But if the parameter is 90, basically it means there's a faster decay, and so you are very likely to forget the ad sooner, right? And so if you look at the green chart here, the red line here basically are the TV GRPs, right? So these are the days where you have run the ads, right? So it's days and the ad that you ran on TV and how many GRPs you ran on TV, right? And the blue and green line essentially show, okay, how much of that TV ad do I remember? And so the blue line generally tends to last longer, and you go and forget here, right? Because there were no TV ads run during this period. But if the ad had a higher decay, let's say, or had a lower decay, it would last much longer. It has higher retention. Right? So the ad stock is generally a indirect measure of calculating customer ad memory retention. Right? How long are you going to remember the ad? Yeah. So yeah, that's on decay, right? Yeah, I think so. There's just one more transformation that we do on the data. So just to recap before going, um, this was basically our original data set, right? So I am going to basically apply three functions one after the other, right, in a sequential manner on these columns, all of these columns individually, right? And instead of doing a direct regression model, how you would generally do for other use cases, you would first apply these transformations. So first I would do a lag transformation on Facebook, then I would do an ad stock. So the ad stock formula that you saw, I would then apply that to this column. And so now the data looks completely different, right? So it has incorporated the different effects that you would see in marketing. So first you would apply lag, then you would apply decay to that, right? Sequentially. And then you would apply saturation. So saturation is basically a concept of if I spend too much, at some point, the incremental that I get from spending, let's say if it per rupee spent, is not good enough for me. And so I can assume, and my ROI essentially is decreasing for the ad, right? So how I explained here is diminishing returns means that advertising provides non-linear decreasing marginal return at scale. So when I scale a certain ad, the incremental that I get, first of all, it's going to be non-linear in nature, and this is observed in marketing in general. And the nonlinear curve again keeps decreasing over time till you reach a saturation point, post which it does not make sense for us to spend on that channel, right? So this is basically the diminishing returns curve is usually created so that you want to understand, okay, based on this year's marketing performance, how do I allocate my budget across various different channels, right? Have I completely saturated my TV ads? Meaning, if I show another TV ad for let's say Tide, okay, Tide washing powder, I want to, should I be running more ads on TV or not? At some point, it doesn't make sense to do that. So then you would not allocate more budget there and instead move it to some other channel which has not saturated yet. And you would look at that based on the saturation curves. Right? So the if you see here, the example is basically the sales from 1 lakh of advertising are less than twice the sales of 50,000 in advertising. Meaning if I spend 50,000 rupees and I got 100, let's say I sold 1,000 units, right? But when I spent 1 lakh rupees, I did not sell 2,000 units as I would linearly expect. I actually ended up say selling only 1,600 or 1,700 units. What that means is my ROI is decreasing again non-linearly over time, right? And so if I spend another another 50K, let's say 1.5 lakhs, it would be even lesser than three times of 50K, right? So that's generally the idea. So hill function is what I've used. Yes, so this is basically what's called a hill function. I previously used this. This is also available in Google's research paper on MMX modeling. So they also use the hill function, but there are various different functions for decay as well as saturation, right? So decay, this is just one way of expressing. There are various functions used for decay. Similarly, there are various functions for saturation. What kind of curve you get depends on the nature of your business. You would have had to observe last 5 to 10 years of marketing spend on your business to understand what the saturation of your ads look like, right? So if you see here, the example here is basically you have two parameters, basically the half saturation point and the slope, which when you change the parameters, you see various different saturation curves. So based on the nature of your business, so let's say the blue line is for an e-commerce business, but for the red line is for retail stores, right? So the nature of, based on the nature of the business, you would tweak the parameter in order to get the saturation curve of your business, right? And so the data would also be transformed. So how you would use this function is, first so the X here is basically your variable, any variable, let's say Facebook, Instagram, right? So on that variable, you would apply this formula. So first you would lag the variable based, and the parameter for lag would be based on the nature of the channel. So let's say I choose Facebook. I lagged it by 2 days, right? I decayed it by, let's say, 20% decay. And then I'm applying a hill function, which transforms into this form of a curve, right? So the numbers get redistributed, right? So what was 1.5 lakh impressions earlier now has broken down. So you would have very less impressions in the beginning. So if you look at the retail store, those 1.5 lakh impressions would have been much lesser in the beginning and then more backloaded towards the end. Whereas in the blue line, which let's say the e-commerce case, most of the ROI from the impressions you get during the first let's say time period, and then it keeps slowly reducing over time till it saturates. Right. So yeah, this is another transformation you apply on the variables, various different variables with different parameters. So if you were doing it, let's say for TV, your lag would be, let's say, 2 weeks, right? You might remember a TV ad easily for 2 to 3 weeks. And so how long would you, so if I look at the full case, the TV ad would be lagged by, let's say, 14 days here, right? So I would first take lag 14 of that. Then I would apply the add shock function or some other decay function, and some with some decay parameters. So let's say the parameter for TV is zero point 0.3, right? So 30% decay I'm seeing in TV. That would be more or less compared to where else you're running ads. So let's say if you're running ads on Facebook, the decay on TV will be much lesser than Facebook. So if the decay of TV is again 30%, the Facebook decay becomes 70% or something like that, because you forget it faster. Right? So I would, let's say, again, going back, I would, let's say, lag the TV variable by 2 days. I would decay it by, let's say, 30%, and then I would apply a saturation function based on the nature of uh, my general marketing, how I have marketed throughout the years, and where do I, at what spend do my ads saturate, right? So this graph basically gives you an example of essentially ad spend versus sales. So this is search ads, basically Google search mostly, and then TV ads, right? So these both have different saturation curves. If you look at the initial spend numbers, so on lower spend, you would see that sales in TV increases much more drastically than in search. But then after a certain point, this, for example, if you look at this exact point, the slope here would be lower than the slope here. This has a higher slope. So at this point, if I have to allocate my budget, I would probably allocate a little more to search because it still has more increase left. The slope is still higher, right? Whereas with TV, I'm already beginning to see the saturation. And so within a certain spend, I would eventually see my TV ads completely saturated, right? So depending on the nature of the channel, the business, various different factors, you would build these saturation curves and understand where should I cut my spending on each channel and where should I reallocate them, right? Wherever there's less saturation, I can always reallocate more budget, right? So that's generally the idea. So yeah, so the saturation is the third transformation you would use, right? And so finally, I'll just tie it all together. So you first uh, did the lag, then the decay and saturation. Now, what you would do is on this original data set that you had, you would take all your variables. Let's say you have 20 variables this way, right? 20 channels, and you have sales for that day, right? And so this is daily level data. So for each day, I would have impressions, and we've standardized from GRPs to impressions, let's say. So we have impressions from all 20 channels, and I have sales for that particular day, right? I would then apply the lag plus decay plus saturation function on top of each one of these variables with different parameters. So the lag would have some parameter, right? Single parameter, let's say 1 day, 2 day, and so on. The decay also is usually a single parameter, lambda, like we discussed here, right? So if we look at the parameters, with lag, you would generally have one parameter to tune. With ad stock, you would generally have lambda is what you would be tuning. So again, mostly one parameter. And then with, if you're using, let's say, hill function for saturation, you would have two parameters. So these four parameters for lag, decay, and saturation, right? These four parameters would change for each of these channels. So for out of home ads, right? If you see a billboard ad somewhere, very large billboard ad for, let's say, Nike, you are going to remember that for a longer period of time. And so its lag and decay and saturation would be different from that of a TV ad and very different from that of, let's say, an online ad, right? And so we apply these lag, decay, saturation with different parameters for each of these variables. Once we've done that, we get a new data set, a transformed variable data set with again the same sales, right? Now this data set is ready basically for regression. So this is the final output you would get if you ran a regression model on top of that, right? So basically, this is basically a log model. So you are essentially getting log of sales and with some intercept. So the intercept interpretation, again, this is like a standard y equal to mx plus c type equation. The difference here is The intercept here means base sales, right? So let's say if, let's take Coca-Cola. So let's say you did not see any ads of Coca-Cola uh, in the next 1 week, right? Coca-Cola would still be selling, right? So because you know the brand, because the product has been used multiple times by so many people, it's likely to get bought even if they don't see an ad, right? And so that's what we know as base sales, right? So for any company, and this depends for companies that have existed for a larger period of time and have great brand recognition, usually have higher base sales. So let's say 50 to 60%, sometimes 70% of the sales come to you purely because people are aware of your brand already. They don't need to see an ad, right? So the intercept here essentially translates to base sales, right? Now you would have the estimates for each of the media channels. So all of these variables that you see here, XTV and XSEM, so there are various different variables, right? So this is search. So for each variable, you would have a estimate that you get here, right? This beta estimate is what will help you measure the effectiveness, because this estimate into the original variable would give you, and divide by y would give you the contribution of Facebook to total sales, right? So if I am measuring across last year of sales, what was the contrib? So let's say in last year, I spent 5% of my budget on Facebook, okay, but 10% of my sales came from Facebook or because of Facebook or attributed to Facebook, however you want to see it, right? Then that's generally a good thing, right? So you want more contribution from certain channels. So in order to understand that, we build this regression model. So these estimates multiplied by the actuals would give you the contribution of each channel to the total sales. And so you can take decisions on whether I should spend more or less in any of these channels. So yeah, that's that. Apart from that, these are the media variables. You will get all your media variables, and each one will have their own estimate, own beta coefficient. And along with that, you also have control variables. So control variables usually are like dummy variables, like flags, 0 1 flags, right? So the reason is sales, when we build a model like this, if we directly only input the marketing variables, it negates the fact that people purchase also based on seasonality, right? So if you're selling, again, Coca-Cola, you are likely to just sell more during the summer. Just seems obvious, right? So during summer, you are going to see more sales, but you cannot attribute it to the media spend during summer, right? And so you should have a dummy or a flag saying, okay, let's say which month of the year it is, which week of the year it is, right? So these control variables are usually those flags, right? Sometimes there are other aspects of the business that you want to capture. For example, let's say Flipkart wants to run big billion a day sale. Okay, so there are certain days on Flipkart where you have these large high revenue days, right? And for those days, I should have a separate flag in my model, because the higher all of the revenue or sales from those days should not completely be attributed to the marketing itself. Those are sales that people regularly come for, and so they are already aware of it. So a lot of people might just hear big billion day and come. They may not need to view an ad, right? So that's those dummy flags should also be included. So there are all kinds of flags. If you're selling, let's say, some kids products, like let's say kids apparel, if you're doing it during summer season, you know that kids are on leave during, let's say, peak summer or peak winter, right? And so when are they back from school and so on? So those are flags that you can have as your control variable. So this is basically seasonality plus other any important business events, right? All of those captured as flags. So you have basically your intercept, which is the base sales. You have your media variables and their estimates, which will help you determine what the contribution of each media channel is to the total sales, and your control variables, which basically are any important business event or seasonality variables. So this is what the general equation looks like. So yeah, apart from this, there's one thing that I haven't included because it'll take me a while to explain, but I can I just want to quickly discuss one thing, which is, let's say if you're running a regression model here, the typical way a lot of companies do this is they just do what someone would regularly do as linear regression, right? You just run a linear regression model. It's an optimization function basically, and whatever estimates you get, you go with that, right? There is a fundamental problem with that approach, and maybe we can have a separate session on this. It'll be hard for me to cover it here, but the problem with a typical linear regression approach is the selection of the best fit line uh, is not optimal for marketing data per se. It applies to other aspects, but for marketing data, it absolutely does not work out, because what happens is the nature of the model optimization of an optimization based model is such that you will get certain estimates negative. For example, if I get a negative estimate for radio, that would not make sense because I spent money on radio. I could not have lost sales because I spent money, right? But your model would give a negative estimate. So in order to deal with that, usually a Bayesian approach is taken, and you can Google. Basically, there's a paper by on Google Scholar, which is called automated market mix modeling. Uh, Using Bayesian, so Bayesian market mix modeling. But basically what the idea here is, I want to restrict the range of my estimates, right? So if I, for example, I spent 5% of my budget on Facebook, right? So my assumption is that the contribution of sales from Facebook would, let's say, lie, and again this is business to business, but let's say it's between 3% to 7%, right? I spent 5% of my budget on it. I'm expecting 3 to 7% of my sales from it, right? That's a large enough range, right? But if the model gives me 20%, then it does not make sense, right? Then the model is not right for this particular situation. This is why we usually take a Bayesian regression approach, because in Bayesian regression, you're not simply looking at the best fit line. You're looking at the most reasonable and the most rational line given your marketing data, right? And so how you would do that is you would want to restrict the estimates. First of all, my estimate should not be less than zero. I need a line which may not be the best fit line, but it is such that my estimates are all positive, because common sense tells me that if I spend on marketing, it should not lead to negative contribution. It cannot, right? Mathematically. So my estimate should be greater than zero. So that's just basic cutoffs, but you can have more advanced cutoffs. For example, like I gave the example, if I spend 5% of my budget on Facebook, uh, if I could calculate the corresponding estimate. So let's say 5% of sales also came from Facebook, right? Given that fact, my estimate or beta, let's say for Facebook, would be, let's say, zero 0.5. Okay. So now I know, okay, zero 0.5 is a baseline that I'm expecting. It could be, say, n standard deviations above or below that, right? And so I could choose, let's say, a normal distribution. So sample from a normal distribution where the mean is 0 0.5, and you can have any standard deviation you want for the distribution. So now I'm sampling out of a certain distribution, which is restricted to be greater than zero, and is also within only certain standard deviations, so that it does not completely exceed the limits, right? And so this can be done for each of the variables. So for TV, if I know I've spent 10% of my budget, my contribution cannot be 20%. And so I would go back and find the estimate that would lead me to 10% sales. And I would choose a normal distribution with that estimate as the mean to sample from. And then whichever estimate sampled from there gives me a better name at the end for the regression. Those are the estimates. That set of estimates is what we would go forward with. So that's generally the idea. That's slightly longer discussion, but yeah, I just wanted to mention that even at this point, it's not entirely over, because a typical regression model does not work here. So there are various methods, but the Bayesian methods are far superior to a typical regression. So yeah, I think that's primarily what I had here. So yeah, I think yeah, if we want, we can move on to Q&A. Yeah. Yeah. Abhijit, are you on the call?
Yes, yes.
Hey, hi, Abhijit. Yeah, I think that's mostly it from my end. Should I just start with
Completed the
the?
session.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Okay,
can.
okay.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, do you want me to take up the?
Actually, there is a question and answer session. Hello,
Yeah.
hello, Anurag. There is a question and answer session. Can you please go through that?
Yeah. I'll go through the Q&A first. Okay, great.
Okay.
Mhm. Okay. So,
Thank you. Thank you.
first, yeah. So, first question is what GRP and how is it different from TRP? So, yeah. So how is it different from?
Hello.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Before the question and answer session, I do a regarding feedback. Just give me.
Mhm.
Yeah, that poll is open actually. You can answer those questions. Then, Anurag.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can answer those questions also. So,
Good. Okay.
thank,
So,
thank you.
yeah. Thank you. So, yeah, I think first I'll pick up GRP and TRP. Okay. So, what is the difference? So, there's not much difference between TRP. So, GRP is basically how much of your total population your campaign can reach, right? So, but TRP is usually used where your audience is a specific set of customers. So, that's the only difference. What is GRP is basically I've taken here. It's basically what percentage of your demographic viewed the ad into how many times you ran an ad, right? So GRP here, uh, just a second. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, GRP here is this would be best to understand. So basically, if you want to run an ad for a certain demographic, and if you know 40% of those viewers in that demographic ended up watching a certain program that you were running. So let's say IPL, right? Saturday night IPL, you are looking at men between 20 to 50 years, right? So based on the TV views, which is obviously recorded, you would know how many people watched that. And so what percentage of demographic watched that TV ad into the number of times you ran the ad, right? So let's say you ran your ad 5 times, right? And only 20% of your viewers watched it. So your GRP would be 100. So that's how you would calculate GRP. Okay. Uh, Getting the data with impressions and the sales coming from different channels hard to get. We need an agency who sells this data in the real world. In that case, we can use market mix modeling. So yeah, this is a good point. So this whatever I'm explaining here is in a way Bayesian market mix modeling. So it's an indirect way of doing market mix modeling, right? But that's not the only output you can get from here. You can get a lot of other stuff, right? So the decay and the saturation curves can give you insight as to should I spend more money or is my ad doing better or is being forgotten sooner, right? So if your ads are being forgotten sooner, it means they don't last very long, and so you would change your advertising strategy. If your saturation is high on a channel, you would start allocating budgets from, or reallocating budgets to a different channel, right? So yeah, I think that's the idea. And as far as hard to get, I would say that's true, but most larger companies already uh, have companies that or have agencies that they have collaborations with who sell them data. So yeah, I think that's already being done. Uh, okay, yeah. How do you convert GRP TRP to impressions? There's a conversion formula. That's a good question, Namit. This actually varies based on the business. So there's no formula like Celsius to Kelvin. If that's the question, there's no standard formula. It would vary based on the business. So um, when I was doing this a few years back for a customer of mine that I was consulting, their business had a different conversion that we had calculated based on a lot of different uh, checks. So this would totally depend on the business. There's absolutely no standard conversion. Okay. Can you touch topics like diminishing returns and decay? I think yeah, I think I've already done those. What if you have Nike in Facebook? Does it lag of 2 days or 10 to 14 days? Yeah, Satish, I think good question. So let's say it depends on what kind of ad you watch. Let's say you saw one of those small boxes on your Facebook feed, right? That will not last for more than 1 or 2 days. I mean, it's usually expected that you buy within a week, but you will forget the ad after a day, right? So the decay of the ad would be very high. So in this case, if you're running a Facebook ad for Nike, the decay would be 90% or something. You would forget the ad within the day, but the lag would still be 5, 6, 7 days. You're expected to, you could potentially shop during the weekend online, right? So shoes are not bought instantly. So the lag will not be 2 days. Lag would probably be 10 to 14 days, right? Maybe slightly lesser, say 7 to 10 days. Again, that's a optimization thing, but yeah, it would be maybe 7 to 10 days, but then your decay would drastically increase because it's being shown on Facebook. So yeah, I think that's that. Sudeshna asks how are these cutoffs for the lag effect decides purely business knowledge? Yeah, so it's not purely business knowledge. The cutoffs for lag and for example, if let's take lag. uh, I can like one common sense way of doing this is, let's say I take all lags for this Facebook, right? So lag 1 to 10 or lag 1 to 4, right? So Facebook cannot have, let's say, lag of more than 4 or 5 days, right? That would be my max based on the business. And so within 1 to 5 lags, one basic way of checking is I would check correlation of sales with different lags and then keep cutoffs for that for those lags. So let's say 2 to 6 days, and within 2 to 6 days, let's say lag 3 days has the highest correlation with sales. So that would be generally a good metric to that would be a good lag parameter to choose, right? But it again varies, but not necessarily on the business. It's based on the model that you're using. So it'll be a model iteration. Yeah. Okay. Chandrasekhar asks, lag can be determined by using auto correlation function. Yeah, I think ACF is also used for lag determination, but that's a standard approach. In this case, it may not necessarily be the case. For typical time series, ACF is useful, but not necessarily in this case. Yeah. Because there's a sales this thing, yeah, that you can check against. Okay. What does decay 0.2, 0.5 mean? Yeah. So decay 0.2, let's say, so Nikhil asks, what does decay 0.2 or 0.5 mean? It means the rate at which the memory of the ad is going away, right? So if I saw an ad today and the decay, again, we can come to how that number came, but let's say you have 0.2 decay or 20% decay, right? It means that I have forgotten my ad, I have forgotten 20% of my ad at whatever lag you had chosen. So if your lag was 5 days, or whatever the half-life of your channel is, let's say the half-life of Facebook is, let's say, 3 days. So within 3 days, I have only 20%. I have lost 20% memory of the ad, and I remember 80% of my ad. So 0.5 would mean I've basically 0.5 is basically the half-life. So half-life of Facebook is 3 days. Then a zero point 0.5 decay would mean that, okay, within 3 days, I have forgotten half the ad, right? So that's the decay. So decay means the rate at which you are forgetting the ad, or how much memory of the ad you have left. Yeah. What was x-axis? I'm not sure which chart. Serkan, if you can elaborate on x-axis for which chart, I would probably. I think in this chart it is K and S. Sorry. Yeah, and for the hill function chart, this is K and S, like the half saturation point and slope, if this is what you were looking for. Yeah. And for this chart, it would be sales and spend. So basically, how much am I spending? What is the corresponding sales? This is for the saturation curve. Okay. There's a growth in the graph in ad stock. slide. No, there's Tagorji asks growth in the ad stock slide. Okay. Yeah. If you see here, there's so I'll explain maybe this quickly. I'll just I don't need to keep the poll up, right? Yeah. So basically, if you see here, there's no growth. So if you look at the TV ads, the red or the pink line basically here, or pink points are the points or times at which you ran a TV ad, right? And if I were to transform that variable using the add stock function, right, like I discussed, like this one, right? So that would vary based on the lambda parameter that I'm giving here, right? This lambda could be, so the two cases here are lambda, let's say 0.9 and zero point 0.1, right? The extremes are taken essentially. So 0.1 lambda would mean that there is very less decay. And so more memory is retained of the ad. So if you see the blue line, that's the ad stock of the ad. Ad stock meaning how well it's stocked in your memory. So that ad stock will remain much longer. So while there were no TV ads run here, you remembered the ad because it's not forgotten very easily. Whereas if you saw like the ad we discussed, let's say a Lay's chips ad on your Facebook feed, let's say, that would have very less memory. You would forget it. You probably forget about it post the next session on Facebook, right? And so the memory here is quickly declining and it goes to zero. And since there are no ads run here, you've forgotten about these ads, right? So this again is two different channels. So certain channels will have higher decay. And so, for example, if you're watching a TV ad, like let's say you have a IPL ad, right? So you are likely to remember that it has lower decay by nature, right? Compared to the Facebook chips ad, which had much higher decay. You would forget it. So that's the idea. Do you apply any standardization to the data set before or after? No, the standardization, I'm not sure what you mean by standardization. If it's, are you meaning scaling 0 to 1, or I'm not sure, but the standardization here would be to change all of them into the same measurement. So if so, since we have TV ads and stuff, like we have GRPs, TRPs also was asked, but I think TRP is not used as often these days. But GRPs would have to be converted into impressions so that we can go about doing this process. It's easier to deal with the data. So that's what we would use, but that would be before the lag decay and saturation. So once we get the data set with all impressions only, we would apply lag decay and saturation to that. Yeah. Before we run the regression model. So Monali asks, how does the estimate in a regression testing derived SME LNC to the saturation? I'm not sure about the question, Monali. It would be great if you can elaborate just a bit more on what this means. I'm not sure what this is. Yeah, demographic data of the target audience will be useful in predicting sales along with ads data. Not necessarily in this case, Abhishek. I don't think we need the demographics data necessarily. The GRP, if you, as you saw in the previous explanation, the GRP already calculation has already taken into account the what percentage of your demographic has viewed that ad. So we don't necessarily need it for this process. The tool like Orange would be useful for this kind of regression. I'm not aware of Orange. Sorry. Yeah. I think, like smart reference topics around Bayesian marketing. So I would say there's a I think there are, just give me a second. If so, there's no such thing as Bayesian marketing. This is basically, we are just using Bayesian regression in marketing. If you want to understand how to basically learn, let's say, Bayesian analysis, I would, just give me a second. I would recommend someone called as Ben Lambert on, Ben Lambert is what I'd recommend. You can look at his lectures on YouTube on Bayesian regression and sampling, various different kinds of samplers used. So that would be a totally different subject. Yeah. If you want to understand how Bayesian regression is used within marketing itself, you can actually just Google Scholar. You can type Google Scholar and Bayesian MMX. You will get the paper by Google on top. So they have a research paper that I've also used in the past. So you could also, but they don't have the code, so you might have to try it yourself. But yeah, they've used Bayesian regression, and they've used Stan along with Python. If you're using Python or R, you can use Stan, which is a language specifically for doing Bayesian regression. So in R or Python, the packages that you have, let's say for regression, are limited to only a typical like objective function based regression. So you would not be able to, let's say, limit your estimates or choose your estimates from a certain distribution, right? But that can be done with Stan. So that's why it exists. So you can check that out. Basic tools for beginners in business analytics. Basic tools, I'm not sure, but yeah, you can. I mean, I'm not sure. Like R or Python, I guess, and SQL. These are the most important. Yeah. I think that's mostly it. Yeah. Okay. So Q&A is done. Okay. This is okay. Is the poll still on, or Abhijit, is this fine? I think I've covered the Q&A also. Is there anything else?
Okay. So, so that's it.
Yeah.
And,
That's...
okay. Then just thanks a lot, Anurag. Actually, on behalf of Analytic Vidhya, I would like to thank you for your time and for delivering such a wonderful session.
Thanks, Abhijit. Thank you for having me here, and thank you to everyone for joining. Yeah.
I hope you guys have filled the feedback poll, isn't it? If not, I request you to fill it. And I'm sure that our audience found it insightful, and hopefully we can conduct more such sessions with you in future. And it was a wonderful session.
Yeah, no problem. Absolutely.
So do fill the feedback. It's up to the audience. So that's it. We are going to conclude it. Thank you, Anurag, again on the behalf of Analytic India. I hope everyone enjoyed the session.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone.